Dave Popkin, WBGO Studios. My guest is a Brooklyn-based musician, producer, poet, musicologist, and former A&R man. His new album, World on Fire, is coming out May 30th. It's his 16th studio album since 2012. There's an album release show at Barbez in Brooklyn to celebrate it that night. It's my pleasure to welcome Reed Turchi to WBGO. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for quite the introduction.
Oh, absolutely. Um, let's talk about the new record, World on Fire. Uh, Kind of sounds similar to an earlier one that you did called Tallahatchie, collection of vintage blues, kind of spiritual, spooky kind of record, songs you've collected in your travels. And I looked at the liner notes, and eight of the nine are traditional, right? There are no particular songwriter that you can attribute it to. Um, so why did you do a record like this?
Yeah, they're the songs that I first learned how to play guitar in order to be able to play. That's type of slide guitar playing that I think originates with Mississippi Fred McDowell or whoever unrecorded, I mean he talks about playing with a teacher or someone he looked up to, but that was actually before recording existed. But these are some of those songs, and you're exactly right about the Tallahatchie comparison or parallel. That was a solo album that really pulled more deeply from some of the non-slide, some slide, but like sort of the R.L. Burnside world of North Mississippi blues. But this album is the first all acoustic ensemble album I've ever done, and that felt like a distinct production idea and also a way to present myself and my interpretation of these songs that I've been really excited about.
I feel like it's really important not only to keep the blues alive, but to talk about and to play songs from, eras gone by. And you talk about North Mississippi hill country blues. Not a lot of people are doing that. I actually interviewed Sue Foley recently, and
Oh,
she did a kind of a throwback record where she honored female guitar players, some of them from this era, some more recent. But um, you go deep with that kind of music. Could you just talk about your background with that?
yeah, it's really a background born of obsession. And while I was at UNC Chapel Hill, I was working with Bill Ferris, who is sort of a legendary folklorist and also connector. He was the head of the National Endowment for the Humanities under Bill Clinton. But what I think is especially important to note is that he is from Vicksburg, Mississippi. And so his documentation of musicians and artists of different natures, but also just everyday people were his neighbors. He wasn't someone journeying to a distant land. And I think that changes the dynamic. And so I was working with him and I was really enthralled with some of his early recordings, particularly his I believe it's 1967 recordings of Mississippi Fred McDowell. And that is a year and a period where a lot of the sort of first wave of Fred McDowell acoustic recordings happened. But I think there's a difference in the comfort level of Bill's recordings. And so Bill was, as he is, was generous enough to let me work through his archival recordings and assemble an album from it. And I was just deeply into that. So I was teaching myself how to play guitar to those very out of tune of different types, field recordings that Bill had done of Fred McDowell. And then that led me physically to spend a lot of time in North Mississippi, um, recording and learning from the people who were there playing that style. I think a lot of people get into that sort of style starting with maybe more like mainstream rock and then work into the roots of it. And for whatever reason, my approach has been a little flipped. And I started with this sort of very idiosyncratic, very regional type of slide playing. And all of my other guitar and blues knowledge has been slowly built out from such a unique and strange place.
Reed Turchi is with us, and it seems like you'd be the kind of guy that is an Alan Lomax-ophile and those kind of like field recordings. Have you listened to a lot of that, spent a lot of time with that music?
Yeah, I mean, I get really fascinated by those recordings and the the crossover between what was happening with recording technology and what was happening with the politics of those trips and releases. With the sort of simultaneous birth of the recorded music business and changing instantly format to format. Or, I mean, we see that today, but and then simultaneously the very slippery trips of field recording, commercialized questions of authenticity, questions of who's curating what and uh, who is inspired by what. I think it's John Lomax who was in Mississippi the night before he died and said, in public remarks that I think I've spent one night too long in Mississippi and died that night. So I get very interested in those stories, and some are very, told very widely and in interesting ways, like the Lead Belly stories. But I think it's a really complicated and interesting thing. The music, the commerce, the folk aspect, whatever that means, on and on.
It's a good album title. One Night Too Long in Mississippi.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have unknowingly written that song.
No doubt. Um, Maybe it's just me, but this is like some of the albums that I love, like some of my Cure albums or Nebraska by Springsteen or Oh Mercy by Bob Dylan, in that it feels like a nighttime album. Like you need to put it on at night. Do you feel that way about it?
Oh yeah, it's very nocturnal. And it's fitting that you mentioned Nebraska for that mood. Me and the other three guys were a quartet, and those three guys all come from a pretty serious jazz background. And we make a lot of jokes about how few chords there are in this music and in these shows. But we recorded it over 2 long nights, and recorded it all live. And I think one of the interesting decisions we made in the studio is we decided that we would only have one microphone per musician, but we did want the most clarity and intimacy we could get from each instrument. And so we ended up, we had each player isolated out. And so each player was isolated under headphones, but then playing together in this very open way. And I think those production decisions along with the music itself. But I think everyone being in this very intimate, in their headphones playing mode, it was very easy to, I don't know, if you spend time recording in a studio, if the headphone mix is challenging, it affects your performance in one way. If the headphones sound really clear, it's inspiring because of, you sound better than you've ever sounded if all things are going nicely. And so I think that really set the stage for how we could create a particular mood and atmosphere.
A lot of our audience is musicians and they've been in a lot of recording studios. So let's talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit. You were 4 years plus at Ardent Studios in Memphis, and now you own your own place, Second Take in the city. What did you learn in Memphis that you want to do or not do with your own music, as a producer, an engineer, in that circumstance?
Yeah, it's my real recording background is in field recording. I mean, when I was in North Mississippi, it was all a rig out of the back of my car and just trying to place very cheap microphones well. My time at Ardent was pretty much the polar opposite, unbelievably gorgeous and historic studio built to do huge projects with gear that people lose their mind over. But I think what's developed through all of that is uh, trying to understand how to use a space in a flexible way to get all types of different sounds. And one of the things I'm really proud of at Second Take is uh, We have about a medium-sized tracking room with four ISO booths, which is a rare setup to have so many ISO booths off of a relatively medium-sized studio, especially in the middle of Manhattan. Um, but what that means is we can arrange microphones, but also players and instruments in ways to lean into very different aesthetics. And I think if you think of the studio as sort of a blank canvas where you can imagine totally different things. I mean, some studios are certainly famous for one sound, which is a slightly different avenue of this conversation. But I think what I'm most proud of is when someone comes in with a vision, like we came in with a vision for this album sound, and we're able to find that in the studio, even if it's something we've never done before or something that doesn't immediately seem obvious with the way the space is laid out.
Reed, you mentioned the band, the musicians that played on the record. Who are they, and are they coming with you on this tour? Because I see you're in Arizona and California and New York and all over the place.
Yeah, they're all based in Brooklyn, and they're with me for all of it. They're very distinctly the band of this album and sound. The other guitar player is named Eric Burns. The bass player is Seth Barden, and the drummer is Joseph Yount. Um, Seth and Joe have played together since middle school, which has been a minute now for them, and they've have played together with Eric for about the last 9 years. They have a band. They play in a couple different groups as sort of a unit within other units. And one that I really admire is Marked for Death, which is sort of avant-garde, slightly boppy leaning jazz ensemble, quartet with a different frontman. And I recorded and mixed and produced their debut album at Second Take also. And it's just self-titled Marked for Death. And I love how that turned out, which is thanks to their musicality, but also thanks to, I think, a good job in the studio helping to find it. And so we've worked together as four musicians on stage. We've worked together as the backing band for another artist in the studio. We've worked together with me on the recording side and them on it's all, and we're friends. We all live in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn. And so that's been a really cool collaboration to sort of know each other's musical abilities and complementary instincts from different angles.
They say that over history, the best bands come from the same place and the same place geographically and the same place kind of thematically and style wise. And you guys are seamless on this thing. Get Back Train, one of the singles, Lay My Burden Down, another one of the singles that people can hear now on streaming. Two of my favorite tracks on the record. They can be heard now before the record comes out on May 30th. I saw you interviewed someplace and you talked about your family, you talked about your grandmother specifically, and visiting her on her deathbed, and the fact that she wanted to sing songs. And what was that whole like intimate, quiet experience like?
Yeah, I mean that was a big I think that interview was probably related to Tallahatchie, or I was referring to that because that I sort of started off doing a lot of like trio based blues rock, and that had become sort of more and more band and rock and indie rock and whatever you want to call it oriented. And that moment when I mean, she was very aware that she was on her way out of the world, and we stopped by her hospital room in the middle of a tour, which is a strange series of events. But yeah, she just wanted to hear songs that she could sing along to. And at that point, uh, I realized that I had maybe gone too far down the paths of production and guitar pedals and layering and all of those things. And um, I suddenly was not very impressed with the ability of gear to communicate. And there's a time and a place for all kinds of sounds and production, and amazing moods can be created from layers and pedals and on and on and on. But for me personally, I think the metric that I became painfully aware of in that moment was, can I communicate with acoustic guitar and vocal? Can we make a thing together right there, it just in the air like that? And on one hand, it's incredibly simple, but you have to keep relearning the same lessons in life. And that's I think World on Fire certainly has an element of that, of like, okay, what can we do with these songs that I've known for a long time and have been played and passed around by who knows how many people over the decades. But what if we do our thing? And I'm really proud of how it came out, because it's, on one hand it's so traditional, and on the other hand it is so distinctly its own sound. And that's the accomplishment I'm really pleased with having captured, because it's hard to do. It's the magic that is very elusive in the studio.
You can't hide anything. And we talked about Nebraska and some of the other ones that I enjoy that are like that are Luca Bloom's records.
Yeah.
Just gorgeous and just kind of very quiet and right like you're sitting in the room with him. I'm curious, and I guess you'll find this out over the next couple months. Is there an audience for this music? Are there people that still connect in that way in a smallish room with people playing songs like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're here. That's nice. I think I think there is, and I think there actually increasingly is, as I think from anything from very large scale political situations in the world to the music being force fed in a very mundane way via streaming services to on and on. I think that people coming out of COVID and wherever we are now in the long, strange tale of our historical moment, more and more are going looking for a thing that is real and is tangible. And I think that's still a subset of the population, but that's kind of always how it is. I mean, I think, if the real diehard music fans, whether that's 7% of the population or 0.7%, if that little sliver shows up and is interested and comes to a show and buys an album and takes the time to listen to an album they don't know, that's enough. I mean, that's enough. I know that there are a lot of arguments for, hoping that suddenly the whole like world changes how they consume media differently. And I think that won't happen. I think that the vast majority of people, it just doesn't matter that much in their lives, and that's fine. But I think that if the small sliver of people who are potentially interested in this happen to take the time to find it, I mean, thanks to like radio stations like yours and thanks to other like in-depth and slower format things, I really think there's a resurgence for that. And I think we're seeing that more and more.
I've found that it's hard to write like that, like those people did, whether it's 75 years ago, 150 years ago, anywhere like in that where it's universal. I mean, these are the same themes. You're able to put out a record in 2025 and people can still understand, exactly what is being conveyed in the songs, but it's hard to create it from scratch, kind of knowing all we know about the modern world and making references and things like that. Have you tried to do a lot of that and write in that style?
Definitely. I mean, for me, one of the most successful modelers of that style is Pop Staples, who famously, had his line that he wants a lyric in all of his songs to be pulled out of the headlines. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. But it's clear how conscious he was with, I want to take a big universal thing, in his case, often a biblical story or a biblical reference of some sort, and then attach something, blisteringly contemporary to it. And I think you get a song like Friendship of his, unbelievable. You have a song like Sun Going Down in the USA, and I think parts of that have aged a little bit because of their contemporary. But I love him as a model, and I really stand by that. And I think, I listen to the details of some of these Fred McDowell lyrics, and I mean, you take one Fred McDowell riff, and he has 500 different titled recorded songs that go with it based on whatever. But you listen in between the lines of that, and there always is that little twist of interpretation in the moment. And that's what I tried to do with this album. I think these songs are truly traditional because they're all different verses or variations of verses that either I've slightly altered or I've pieced together from different versions. And as I was like going back through and typing out the lyrics to, like lyric sheets to go with the album and everything else, it was funny because I went back to some of the songs that in my head were the obvious references, and I listened and I was like, oh, I swapped out 80% of the lyrics on this, and it's just like, oh, that's how this song developed in my head for years. What I thought was like a very obvious one-to-one influence to performance, in fact, was radically altered, just through a human's experience. Yeah.
And a lot of times, I'm sure, McDowell or others are just doing it from memory and from oral tradition. I heard McCartney interviewed at some point recently, and they asked him like, how were some of those early songs like just so poppy and so catchy? He said, I'd write them on the train. I didn't have anything to write it down with. I had to remember them, so I had to make it like memorable enough that I'd be able to do it 6 hours from then or whatever. Anyway. Another great songwriter, Randy Newman. You did a tribute album to him. Reed does Randy. That's a cool one that folks should check out, especially if you just know him from like the scores and the movie music and whatnot. His individual records are something else.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's pretty like top level songwriting for me musically and story wise. And yeah, an album like Good Old Boys is a pretty incredible achievement in my mind. Sail Away, like so I mean, but with him too, I mean you've someone clearly working to tell more universal stories through specific narrative contemporary developments or through like picking up on specific historical figures, like Huey Long, who shows up in Good Old Boys so much, and that kind of commentary. And yeah, learning those songs. I had befriended a guy named Jim Moran who helped do a lot of those arrangements of those Randy Newman songs for guitar, and those arrangements are so beautiful. And I was a piano player before I was a guitar player, and to um, to play those Randy Newman parts on guitar so successfully transcribed and interpreted and arranged from the piano version was such a pleasure. I mean, that was just a passion project for a few years to dig into those arrangements and learn those and build out from there.
So what's coming this summer? You going to try to take this thing on the road more? Do you have a lot of work to do at Second Take Studio?
Yeah, we'll be out playing this music a lot. Um, I'm excited to see where it goes live. The album is all acoustic, as you know. But live, partly because of logistics, we're playing it all electric. And part of that is due to the challenge of hauling upright bass around the country. But as we've been rehearsing that, I've been really interested in what kind of space we can make. And I think we've found a cool balance of preserving the mood and the sort of hypnotic, nocturnal feeling that a lot of the songs have. But doing it in a way that doesn't have to feel precious on stage. It's very hard. I find that it's very hard to mic and present an all acoustic ensemble in a club. And and for now, I think this approach will be really interesting. And we'll see where it goes.
Well, I'm enjoying it. Good luck with it. Look forward
Thank you.
to talking to you getting down the line. May 30th, World on Fire comes out everywhere, and there will be an album release party at Bar Bez in Brooklyn to celebrate its release. Reed, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's a pleasure.